So the next portion of our turn of the century unit is to study the Spanish-American War. And so during this time period, at the turn of the century that we've been studying, the very late 1800s moving into the beginning of the 1900s, we have Cuba here that really was having a lot of struggles with Spain. And Spain actually controlled Cuba, that territory. During this time period, there were a lot of countries, European countries, that had small territories that they had taken over. Even when you talk about earlier on with Great Britain controlling the United States as a territory for a while, we gained our independence. Well, Cuba similarly wanted independence from Spain. And so you could see across the Atlantic Ocean, if you look at that map, Spain all the way over there in Western Europe. And then you have Cuba, this country 90 miles south of the tip of the United States, so very close. So we didn't want to be involved in any trouble with Spain if they were to come to Cuba, but we knew that this was near us in the issue that Cuba was having, and if we had our way, we wanted Cuba to be free and not have Spain involved anywhere near us. So our president at the time, President William McKinley, he wanted to support Cuba, but he didn't want any trouble. He knew how terrible war was because he was involved in the Civil War, and he fought and he saw the death and destruction, and he did not want to bring America into any battles, especially a war that may involve Spain, who was a strong power at the time, and it was something that he wanted to provide help, but not get in the middle of things. So his plan was to send a battleship just off of Cuba in the Cuban harbor, like near Havana. And this ship called the U.S.S. Maine, he thought would kind of calm the situation if Spain saw that they brought in a battleship and said it was not an act of war, but it was just their kind of support of Cuba. He thought Spain would not press the issue and come and maybe battle with Cuba or get involved very close to the United States. That made us nervous. And so he sent this battleship to Cuba. You can see in the map just there, Havana is the capital here. You can see how close the United States is. You have the Bahamas and Jamaica there. And so for a while, several weeks, this worked. There was not any instigating fights between Cuba and Spain to where it looked like they would be going to war. And we thought, okay, maybe this will work and calm things down. Well, unfortunately, the U.S.S. Maine explodes. February 15, 1898. And tragically, 266 men aboard the ship died. And this explosion, it was not obvious what had happened. And the soldiers, even on the ship, could not point to any signs of an attack or what would have caused the blast. And it was found out much later that for sure that this was not anything but it was a problem aboard the ship, and it was not an attack by Spain. However, the news organizations for the United States picked up the story, and these U.S. newspapers blamed Spain for this explosion and this attack. They said, Spain, this is an attack on the United States, and we should go to war. And so Americans, when they read this story, they demanded to basically go to war with Spain. These stories that were not based on facts, this became known as yellow journalism. Yellow journalism is something that really throughout time here in our country, even to today, it's hard to know sometimes whether or not details are based on facts and truths, or if it's something that's based on theory or opinions or just ideas that maybe are not true. And so when you talk about the newspapers and the news, really this was the start of it to where there were a lot of factors that would cause these newspaper journalists and these owners to write this story, and mainly it benefited their news organizations, and they were able to sell more newspapers, and people, it was basically to promote business. And so what happened here was the United States citizens demanded that something be done. You could see here it says, remember the Maine. And so the USS Maine, really, President McKinley, even though he didn't want war, had very little choice at this point and said, okay, this was Spain attacking the United States. And so a war was fought in Cuba by the United States and Spain. So when we say Spanish-American War, it was Spain from Europe in America, and it was not fought on our land, it was fought in Cuba. And so you can see here, April 25th, they declared war, President McKinley did, and soon after, in August, the war was already over. We very quickly defeated Spain. We'll study a little bit more, but Theodore Roosevelt became known, basically famous for his group of kind of ragtag group of people that weren't really soldiers, but he led this group. They were called the Rough Riders, and we're going to talk about Theodore Roosevelt more because he eventually became president. Well, this war was fought, and in 1898, August, the Treaty of Paris was signed, and there were several factors here that made the United States really grow in power because of what happened with Spain. And so the Treaty of Paris stated that Cuba would gain independence from Spain. And so once again, this is something we wanted because we didn't want Spain to be that close to us if they took over that territory and brought in any sort of military. And so Cuba was given independence, and eventually we would have some issues with Cuba, who would become communist, and we would have some issues later on down the road. But right now they were given their independence, and the United States gained 3 territories. When we talk about imperialism, imperialism is the idea that countries go out and obtain new land and resources and power. The United States hadn't done a whole lot of this, but now all of a sudden we've gained and acquired these territories that once again made us a stronger country. And if you look here, Guam, Puerto Rico, and the Philippines, when you look at this map here, these are 3 territories that you have to know when you're asked what were the 3 territories the United States gained. Puerto Rico, you could see close to Cuba, near the United States, was a territory. And then also the Philippines and Guam, way over on the other side of the Pacific Ocean, closer to Asia, those were also U.S. territories. And so now we had these areas that were American possessions, like we own this land and these were our territories. And it was not just that made this an important war. And so you'll hear it referred to as a splendid little war, okay? This is a splendid little war, and this is because we have the Philippines, Guam, Puerto Rico, we gained that, but even more so, we gained respect with the world. The world saw us as a power that's really moving into World War I and World War II would continue. And so no war is splendid, but in this case, in a relatively quick time, the United States gained a lot of power as a result of this war, and there were not that many deaths, and it did not last that long, but the benefits for the United States were great. And you'll see here, there's some resources. I have a couple links to some of these videos, but you may explore this also as optional if you choose.